actually for Kelly. You talked a lot about the government and the opportunity to shed space. So one of the things that we find in Accenture, as we start to talk to the federal government and the state governments, there's an interest in shedding space, but there's a concern on the constituencies. So how do you take that?
Concern on that, I'm sorry?
A concern about impacting the local communities and impacting the constituents. So especially on the state level, they say, hey, I'd love to get rid of that real estate, but I'll be impacting the communities that vote for me. What do you think about when you look at shedding space?
That's a very good. It's it's not an easy thing to realize that you've pretty much overbuilt a lot of communities. But look at, for instance, the post office, what they're doing now. I mean, it gets to a point where you have to, as Brian said, sort of face reality. I mean, if you don't need the space anymore, then you don't need the space anymore. And you might have to think of something else to do with that space, or to think of ways of using it that are different than in the past. It is a process, and of course, because we are all tied up in, not only do we have legislators like senators and representatives that we have to, we don't want to step on their feet. That's the democracy. But we also have to look at the impact on the federal deficit. These are not easy answers. I'd love to be able to tell you that, oh, the answer is X, but it's got to be on a case-by-case basis. I will say that Martha Johnson is much more interested in pulling out of leased locations. And remember, 25% of our portfolio in GSA is in Washington, D.C. So, I always say to people that are in Washington, you forget that the federal government is a little SSA office out in Iowa City. Those type of places, maybe it's necessary to keep. It's the great big behemoths that you really got to be able to ask, do we need to go out and lease huge amounts of space? I'll say one more thing. What we're doing with DHS, with Gensler and DHS, is that they are not getting the money they thought they were going to get. They've built a huge campus at St. Elizabeth's. They were expecting more money. They're not going to get that. Congress has basically said to them, live within your means. And so they've totally had to rethink the way they do business, which 3 years ago they said, oh, we don't do mobile work. We don't do mobile. Now they're saying, please, show us how you do mobile work. So it's a process.
The other thing to consider is it's the real estate, right? It's not the staff.
Yeah.
So in terms of its effect on the community, yeah, you're going to cut real estate, you're going to cut staff, if you have to live within budget. So it's not the staff that's cut.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there's a question down there.
Well, the question is kind of along the same line. With today's the larger corporation are cutting on real estate footprints, and with implementing the workforce program, that means more and more effect would be on the real estate. There will be the vacancy rate will be going up, and architectural interior services will be down, and the furniture industry. Do you have a study on how much of that program, or in terms of like person, would affect the other industry? If one person is going to telecommute, how much economically would affect the other related industries?
That's a great question, actually. I've not seen a study like that, but I think that's a good point of research, is kind of the ripple effect of what's going on today. I think that's a fabulous point. But I've not seen any research. Have you guys seen anything on that?
No, but I mean, I think the industry is changing. Construction, architecture, furniture, the industry is changing. And we can either embrace it or we can fight it. But I think the way we work has changed. The way technology has affected our lives has changed. Gen Y that we heard so much about. It's changed, and you know, to just say we're going to keep these industries as they are is not being smart.
Well, it's part of the 49%, isn't it?
Yeah, the technology.
You know,
yeah.
the improvement is the 51%, but the problems, and yes, there will be problems, but that is part of life, it's part of evolution. That the other Kevin Kelly talked about this morning. I would say philosophically, I'm always interested by, Thomas Jefferson's original idea of the country was that, it would be a much more agrarian, that there would be towns that were much more self-sufficient, that it was this huge continent, and that we wouldn't be commuting into cities like this, that the town, for instance, I live in Petaluma. Now, Petaluma is a tiny, small town. But Petaluma, in many ways, is self-sufficient. It's a perfectly wonderful place to be. It's not boring, but it's small. And I think what's going to happen real estate-wise is that even though we're talking about a big move to the cities, I think that the smaller places may become stronger and that there may be hubs there that the real estate industry can tap into. Petaluma, for instance, has a lot, on the other side of the freeway, has a lot of vacant office space. Maybe we've built enough. Frank Duffy calls architects serial builders. I love it. Because we've got enough buildings, we've got enough structures. Now let's concentrate on what's inside. We have the egg shell, we need to do the egg.
One of the people on the summit was Barry Varco, who's now head of property at Zurich, and he said the most sustainable building is the one that you don't have.
Yeah.
So there's another angle there. Yeah, there's a question over here.
Bob Fox, Workspace Design Magazine. Kevin, I think you spoke about the unit of measurement now. I mean, we've traditionally measured the efficiency of space in terms of people per square foot. Mm-hmm. And you talked about the workstation, and now you're talking about the unit of measurement should be the neighborhood. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you can expand on that and maybe share some metrics that you're using.
Okay. Well, for instance, as I said, it's become very common in the government for people to get 8x10 workstations. And the reason for that, basically, is that space is so much cheaper than people are. So when you're negotiating with a union, you say, okay, I'll give you a bigger workstation. I won't give you a salary increase, but I'll give you a bigger workstation. So these have become endemic. You see, GSA has got out of being the space police in the 1980s. We used to tell people how much space they could have. They could get 135 square feet per federal employee. And that all changed. We got out of it for whatever reasons, legislation, whatever. A lot of people wish that we would go back into that, but that's not going to happen. We became like a regular real estate company. If you want a 300 square foot office, fine, but pay me the rent. So the workers became extremely interested in their workstation. It became their home away from home, their clubhouse, their library, their family room. It became their space. And they didn't care about the conference rooms. They didn't care about the focus rooms. They didn't care about what made the office a city. And what I'm saying is we need to think of not just the workstation. The workstation is only one, just as a house is only one part of the neighborhood. We haven't looked at the neighborhood. How do you get from the communications area to the heads down area? Those type of design issues, which are just as interesting as building a building, believe me, I've done both. Those are the type of things that we need to really focus in on. Is that?
I might add on. What we often measure is we measure individual space and group space.
Yeah.
So, and we do that on all your projects. So there's that. And then what we've also been measuring is seats, viable seats and individual seats. So if a neighborhood has 40 people, you might have 32 individual seats, but 42 viable seats and a total of 100 seats. So just, you know, it's looking at mobility and how people move in and out of the space through the day and making sure, mainly people are worried that they're going to come to work and there's not a space. So that's how we kind of.
But I think the metric has changed now, you know, and with the virtual office, you know, is there a standard, consistent metric that, you know, organizations can use across the board as a comparative analysis to the efficiency of their organization?
I think it's still square feet per person.
Yeah, it's usable square feet per person. So if by the unit of measurement, I meant the conceptual unit, we need to think in terms of neighborhood. Let me just give you an example. If this were a government building, and that space was out there, and we increased the number of people, all of a sudden that space would be gone and be filled up with desks. I'm talking about in the past. That space out there is just as important as this space in here. That's the new way of looking at workspace. But in the past, we'll just fill up desks there, you know, because the desk, the workstation was more important than anything else.
Thank you. Question down here.
Actually, statement.
Yeah.
One of the things we talk about in the Cornet class about enabling mobility is the metric changing and really changing to cost per person served. Because instead of cost per seat, if you get after cost per person served, it's a much more realistic metric around what is the population and how do we manage to house it.
Question over there. Yeah.
My question is, when you go through this transformation, how do you deal with stuff? Where's my stuff? Where am I going to put my stuff?
So I can tell you from our perspective, what we do is we coach it through the training that at a certain point in time, if you're a level 2 employee, that's where you give up your assigned seat. We're going to ask you to remove your stuff, and we're going to give you some form of storage. It's not the pedestal. We ask for their keys back to their pedestal because obviously, as you know, if somebody's able to lock up something, it now becomes their cube again. It doesn't matter if their name's there or not. My stuff is in that cubicle. So what we assign is there's these great little hot boxes that you can get, and it fits a laptop computer in it. Really what we found is people really just want a place to put their reusable water bottle, their reusable mug. Those are things that we give out to all employees. So where can I store that? And where can I store the picture of my dog to put out, whether it be your dog or kid? So we just provide a very small lockable, they choose the combination. When you leave the company, take it with you because we don't know what your combo is. And you know, we're looking at ideas of in the neighborhood cubes putting digital photo frames that you can just, how many people already have like their USBs or you're plugging in your iPhone to charge up anyway. So, you know, you might as well have your kids and your significant other and your animals just plug in. It's actually been quite an easy transition on our work from home side. The stuff becomes the issue with our hotel employees. Where's my sales collateral? You know, we point to the sales collateral closet and that doesn't seem to work, but we're getting over that. It's just a lot of coaching.
If you go through it and actually do some sort of workshop or training, that helps too, because then teams are deciding on their own how much space they get, what they should throw away, what they should.
I think we're going to have one last comment. We're out of time. I want to catch up a little bit with time, but can I ask each member of the panel? I first, I think, spoke in the Valley back in Alt Office. When was that? That was a long time ago, Alt.office. And then the talk was all about the water cooler moment in the Valley. It was about people getting together around water coolers and having the great ideas. And we've heard from these talks about mobility, you know, you might be in 2 or 3 days a week, and therefore you're mobile the other days. How can you, is the water cooler moment still valid and important? Because if people are not in on the same day and not around the water cooler, how will the Valley and other people carry on innovating? So if you could maybe kind of do a last thought each. We'll start with Kevin. Is that dead, or is it a different water cooler moment?
No, I don't think so. I think that the workplace, I think it's going to become more like the 19th century kind of club, you know, where you sat around in chairs and talked about business rather than sitting in little corrals like a library. But, for instance, one thing we found out with DHS, you know, remember I said that once it becomes current in the government, it's like, let's all go mobile. Well, we're finding through the work that we've done that, what is it, Elisa? It's like 1,400 employees to 1,000 desks. It's about the maximum you want to go without losing the sense of the community, that you're part of something. When you go to like 3,000 employees and 1,000 desks, then you may be sacrificing the far more expensive capital of people to the less expensive capital of space. So that's one of the reasons why we think that this organized way of looking at how you assign neighborhoods is so important, because we want to keep the right mix of people accessible.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I would say that actually two things spring to mind. When you look at the water cooler moments today, I think we live in a perpetual water cooler moment. I mean, there's no lack of, social media, and everyone seems to be constantly in touch, and it's almost an overload, at least from what my clients tell me. But what we find interesting, at least in our centers, is that this new dynamic is occurring where people are now collaborating outside of their companies, which to me is endlessly fascinating. So we've started something called Regis Link now to help that linkage from company to company. And when you look at other companies besides Regis that do the same thing we do, that's kind of the hot thing. It's not just collaboration within your company, it's also refreshing to be collaborating outside of your company. So when you look at new water cooler moments, I think one of the new trends we're seeing is people talking to people outside of their company in the same physical space, which I think is fascinating.
Even competitors.
Yeah, well, got to watch that, obviously.
Right.
Yeah, I think they've said it basically. It's happening virtually. It's more important than ever. It has to be modeled, and I think it has to be displayed as well, so people can tell that those informal, like the white. Who showed the whiteboard in the lounge or something? Yes, Sudhakar. I know I butchered that. But anyway, yeah, I think that's important. It has to be displayed and modeled.
Dawn?
Exactly the same. I think social networks allow that water cooler movement to happen real time, but again, requiring people, not putting people completely out of the workplace and saying you must never come in is going to help